Hello guys, welcome back to Shraga Debunks. This is episode 5. My name is Shraga and this is a social media segment where I take some anti-Zionist or anti-Jewish propaganda and I debunk it. Today we're going to be continuing with the trend from last episode involving BDS, so let's get to it. Today we're going to be talking about the Palestinian land. So, BDS, what do they say? Let's take a look. Israel is occupying and colonizing Palestinian land. That's according to their website, same place as last time. Let's get to it. First of all, Palestinian land. What is this? Okay, well, what's this Palestinian land of which you speak? Let's take a look at the history of the land. Okay, so it started off, let's go back all the way back to the Iron Age. We've got the Jewish state of Israel. Okay, it's controlled by the Shoftim, the judges, and it's controlled by, after them, Shaul, David, and Shlomo. After that, the kingdom splits into two independent Jewish states, Judea and Samaria, the other way around. Judea and Samaria, otherwise known as Israel and Judah, right? When Israel was invaded and destroyed, the people in Judah, the Judeans, became known as the Jews as they survived by themselves for a bit and then were exiled by the next empire. After these two Jewish states, what happened was the Assyrians came and they invaded the land. This was the first major empire to have invaded the entire land and take control of it. The Assyrians, then the Babylonians came. The Babylonians did the same. They exiled the Jews to Babylon. This is where the Talmud Babel comes from, which is the Gemara, the Talmud of Judaism. Then came the Persians, and there was a whole story of Purim with Queen Esther, and that's what happened with those three empires that came first. Next, the Greeks invaded Israel with their huge empire, and they took control of the land. There was a Jewish revolt, led by the Hasmoneans, or the Maccabees as they're called, in which they took back the land and ruled it for 80 years. This wasn't exactly a perfect Jewish state. They were very far from perfect. They were not the greatest, but we're going to count them as a Jewish state. That's 4 Jewish states so far, and no Palestinians. After the Maccabean kingdom, the Romans came and invaded Israel. And when the Romans invaded Israel, they removed all traces and they properly named Israel Palestine, or Palestinia. After the Romans invaded Israel, they lost their empire, which was the Byzantine Empire. They lost their empire to the Muslims who invaded in 630 AD. This is the first time Arabs were introduced to this area as invaders and colonizers, and they invaded to control the country and settled here like Israel is being blamed for doing. Okay? At this point, 4 Jewish states, 0 Palestinian states. This is part of the Muslim Empire. After the Muslim Empire, the Crusaders came in to control the country. The Crusaders came from Europe, and they just invaded and controlled all of Israel. They laid siege to Jerusalem, they conquered it, that's what happened. After the Christians, who ruled for about 100 years, there was the Mamluk Empire. The Mamluks, the Mamlukim I think they're called, came and invaded the entire country again to control. Again, none of these people are individual nations, they are empires that spread across the country. All of these people are empires, they're not indigenous to the land. 4 Jewish states in the land, not empires, Jewish states. At this point, we're at the Mamluks. After the Mamluks came the Ottomans. The Ottomans came and invaded the land, again, same as always. After the Ottomans lost it in World War I, the British came into control of the land. After the British came into control of the land, the Jews returned to the land. They were given the land by the British. They didn't take it, they were given the land back by the British. And once they had the land, they renamed it Israel and not Palestinia like it had been ever since the Greeks named it that. The Greeks named it and the Romans ratified it. So where does this Palestinian name come from? Well, the word Palestine comes from Plishtim, the people who were here when the Jews were also here, fighting against the Jews. They themselves were invaders from Crete. They were colonizers from the island of Crete. And they were the Plishtim in Israel, and the Greeks renamed Israel Pleshet, or Palestine, after the people who were the biggest pain in the butt to the Jews, who were at that point extinct. The Arabs living here today are in no way connected to the Plishtim. They are not in any way connected to the Philistines. They are Arabs, just like they will tell you, just like all of history will tell you. In fact, they only began calling themselves, as we mentioned in episode 1, Palestinians after 1967. So, the next question is, who are these Palestinian people, as they're called? First of all, let's take a look. The guys who invaded in 630 AD, those are some of the Arabs that are living here. The Arabs living here, a lot of them are from there. But a lot of them aren't as well. A lot of them are migrants from other countries, other Arab countries like Egypt, what was Transjordan, Syria, Lebanon. All of these people, they came from other countries to live in Palestine in the time since the first Jewish Aliyah, the first Jewish pilgrimage to Israel, not the pilgrimage, this entrance to Israel, this Aliyah we call it, in 1881. These Jews entered Israel in 1881 and they started bringing agriculture, bringing technology, bringing European culture, bringing culture from other places, mixing things, creating this place that is livable in, and so Arabs started migrating as well. Most of the Arabs, according to Turkish and British papers, are actually immigrants or migrants from other Arab countries between 1881 and today. So a lot of the Palestinians do actually have roots here, but a lot of them also don't. And their roots here only go back as far as they've invaded. I've spoken to a bunch of Palestinians, and they're telling me as well the same thing. Most of them aren't actually here for a long time. Most of them are actually coming from different places. So, that's who the Palestinians are, and that's about Palestinian land. So, what's BDS talking about? Again, this is just an excuse to hate Israel. Well guys, thanks for listening. I hope I've effectively debunked the Palestinian land claim. And as always, if you have any ideas, comment them down below. Like, share, subscribe, helps me out a lot. Yeah, as always, I'm Israel Chai.